May 26, 1996, 16th Street and Georgetown Road on the west side of Indianapolis, Indiana. The same real estate that gave birth to the world's greatest racecourse back in 1909. The same place that has come to host the world's largest single-day sporting event. And the same event that's made names like Foyt, Unser, and Mears famous all over the world. But today, a new era begins at the Indianapolis 500. It's race day in Indianapolis.
The 1996 Indianapolis 500 was one of the most stunning races in the event's long history. The cars had never been faster, the drivers were inexperienced and obscure, and it was at the heart of the biggest political fight in American racing history. It was a dramatic, strange, tragic, exciting, anger-filled battleground race, the likes of which have never been seen before or since. Like a dark cloud hanging over it, the 1996 Indy 500 was the result of a political fight that had been brewing for years. It ended with Indycar racing split into two separate bodies. The opposing sides were a collection of team owners making up CART, and Tony George leading the Indy Racing League. As the grandson of Indianapolis Motor Speedway owner Tony Holman, George was a part-time racer in the mid-1980s who worked in track management. At only 30 years old, he took over as track president in 1989. From the beginning, his relationship with the CART series was cold. In the 1960s, IndyCar racing was unified and strong. Indianapolis Motor Speedway owner Tony Holman worked closely with USAC, creating a strong connection between the Indy 500 and the entire season. Decades later, that would be only a memory. Like World War I created problems that led to World War II, the CART IRL war of the 1990s can be traced back to a split in the late 70s. After the death of Tony Holman in 1977, IndyCar racing was left without strong leadership. The people in charge of USAC were accused of mismanaging the series in many ways, most notably in their failure to attract money for the teams. Team owners left USAC and formed CART.
In the winter of 1978, car owners got together and decided they wanted to break away from USAC and form their own organization. USAC had been sanctioning IndyCar races since 1956. The reason for the meeting, the so-called Dan Gurney white paper, in which he listed several reasons why a new organization should be formed. For one thing, Gurney thought that IndyCar racing's full potential was not being realized.
We have a potentially huge international sport. For instance, with long-term rules that are set up to go 3 to 5 years, I'm sure we would get participation from foreign teams. The Porsche factory, possibly. The French Renault factory. They're all very interested in coming to the biggest race in the world on its own, but also they would go to the rest of the Indianapolis series, and it would just be a tremendous thing.
It was obvious that IndyCar racing could not support two groups. Both car owners and drivers were determined to show that the new kids on the block were unified.
I think one of the reasons we're getting such strong support from the drivers is the fact that we're interested in their input. They're starting to realize that they can go to CART with their problems and people are going to listen.
With the biggest names in racing on their side, CART quickly established dominance, and USAC lost the fight within 3 years. In an uneasy truce, USAC remained in charge of the Indy 500 because the Speedway refused to allow team owners to have too much control over the event. But this was a strange situation, where a year-long series didn't have control over its biggest event. It was as if the NFL didn't control the Super Bowl, or if NASCAR didn't control the Daytona 500. Neither the Indianapolis Speedway nor CART was happy with the situation. CART was organized as a somewhat democratic board of directors, where the team owners would make all the rule decisions. Despite their optimism at the beginning, CART's many problems couldn't be ignored by the late 80s.
In 1979, Championship Auto Racing Teams was formed when car owners felt the United States Auto Club wasn't listening to their problems. Now, 10 years later, the same thing seems to be happening.
Only a few of the most powerful team owners like Roger Penske, Pat Patrick, and Carl Haas were voting members on the board of directors. Small teams believed the big ones could protect their advantages by making rule changes that helped them.
One astute observer said that IndyCar racing today is like an ice show, with the stars being those few teams that win, all others members of the chorus. CART's have-nots will try to effect changes to make their lot better, while the CART haves will try to keep the status quo. We recall one CART founder more than a dozen years ago saying that in order to make this work, All we need are a lot of sponsors and some cars to pass. Well, they have the sponsors, but the cars to pass are getting fewer and fewer. Democratic racing organizations have never done well over the long run, but this isn't to say that one can't succeed.
Small teams felt the large ones were actively hurting them. Beyond owning a team, Roger Penske was co-owner of the Ilmor Engine Company that built the powerful Chevrolet motors. At the end of 1989, Penske was accused of convincing CART to change the rules in a manner that helped the Chevy engines and hurt their rivals. Not only did the Ilmor engine cost a lot, but they couldn't make enough to supply all the teams that wanted them. Penske could decide who got the engines and who didn't. Adding to that, the cost to compete was rising out of control.
There's an air of discontent in the IndyCar pits these days. Many car owners are concerned, even upset, over a wide range of issues. The ever-escalating cost of cars, engines, and parts is one bone of contention. Car owners generally agree now that to keep a car in the top 5 requires an annual budget of $5 million. Until Sunday, all races have been dominated by 3 teams, all of which use Chevy engines and are owned by CART directors. This all-dominant power plant is not generally available, which rankles the have-nots no end. Why should I pay to race when I know I can't win is the oft-asked question the Chevy policy raises. Repeated changes in engine and chassis rules, leading to increased costs, are said by owners to reflect poor management. Fewer and fewer cars are showing up for the races. At Sunday's Quaker State 500 at Pocono, only 26 cars went under the green flag, a far cry from the traditional 33 seen for years at 500-mile events. The CART board, car owners all, saw one of their members, Andy Penske, quit in disgust recently, citing, among other things, a gag rule he says he's not comfortable with. And of the more emotional CART car owners, some say that between now and season's end, there could be an eruption on pit road.
CART leaders were losing control of their own paddock, but still looking to compete internationally with Formula One. In 1988, Pat Patrick said IndyCar should leave American tracks like Road America and compete internationally instead.
We need to get the series out of Elkhart Lake and out of Mid-Ohio and places where there's no market for the sponsor. We need to get world recognition. We need to be in Japan. We need to be in Europe. We need to be in South America. We need to be in Vancouver, Toronto, New York City.
At the same time, Formula One was concerned with CART as well. In 1990, the FIA considered creating an oval series to fight CART. Away from their international ambitions, IndyCar and the Indy 500 were split in almost every way. USAC controlled the rules for the Indy 500, and the rule package for the race didn't always match CART's rules for the entire season.
The owners will also be talking about this letter sent to them earlier this week by the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Vice President Tony George. In it, he scolds USAC and CART for not communicating on 1990 rules. It says, quote, if CART is serious about reorganization, and if they're serious about a governing body truly independent of political and financial interests, perhaps consideration should be made toward a common rules committee for USAC and CART. Now, many are saying that the Speedway is going to have to step forward and play a leadership role if IndyCar racing is to grow and prosper.
By the late 80s, CART leaders were provoking the Indianapolis Speedway with high levels of overconfidence. They were vocal in their belief that the Indy 500 was popular because of them, and not the other way around.
In my opinion, who exactly is the person who waves the flags or texts the cars necessarily isn't the key issue. It's the ability to work together for the good of everyone, because after all, we strengthen the Indianapolis 500 as a show. And the stronger we are, the stronger the Indianapolis 500 is. And as long as we keep that in mind, I think there's ways that we can work together for the benefit of both.
I cannot agree that a stronger CART makes for a stronger Indy 500. Everything in IndyCar racing is predicated on the Indy 500, including sponsorships. Now, the race has been around since 1911, and if they had to, the Speedway could go without a sanction. But I do agree we have to have that communication between the factions of USAC CART and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Looking at the situation from the sidelines, the CART rank and file don't seem to understand that they're involved in a sport that exists for one reason, the Indianapolis 500. For without this race, the series would wither and die.
As the Indy 500 was clearly the most important race on the IndyCar schedule, Tony George wanted more input on the entire season. Unhappy with the expensive direction of the series, George called for new rules in 1991 that would eliminate turbochargers and lower the cost of engines and chassis. In November of that year, he presented a plan to restructure the kart board into a 7-member committee instead of 22 members. The restructuring plan was turned down. In 1992, he was added to the kart board, but only as a non-voting member. One of the biggest points of contention was George's belief that more races should be held on ovals. He pointed out that other open-wheel series around the world race on road courses. A series mostly on ovals would make IndyCar unique and stand out from everything else worldwide. You can't beat your competition if you do almost the same thing everyone else does.
So, I think oval racing is considered, Americana, and that's what we should, in my opinion, be trying to perfect and then export.
Furthermore, IndyCar didn't have a good development program to get new drivers. A lot came to IndyCar when their careers lost momentum in other series. They were getting the old Formula One drivers, and the drivers who couldn't even reach F1. Beyond their closer competition, more races on ovals would likely allow the driver development ladder to include American sprint car drivers too. This goal was personal for Tony George, whose father was Elmer George, a dirt racer who drove in 3 Indy 500s. The young man grew up with the idea that sprint car drivers like his father could work hard and someday race in the Indy 500. While legends like A.J. Foyt and Mario Andretti went from sprints to Indy back in the 60s, by the early 90s, almost every driver with that background was dismissed by IndyCar teams.
Langhorne, Springfield, Indianapolis, Syracuse, Sacramento, the 1-mile dirt tracks. This is the way IndyCar racing was until the early 1970s. To get there, you started in midgets, moved up to sprints, and then championship cars. Some of the drivers that began their careers in that way are still around, and the popularity and success of A.J. Foyt, Mario Andretti, and Johnny Rutherford may stem in part from their days on the dirt and their natural ability of driving a race car. But the road to Indy has changed.
I think the sprint car racer these days is pretty much phased out.
Between 1982 and 83, the number of IndyCar races on road courses jumped from 25% to nearly 50%. That has led to a new breed of IndyCar driver, those like Roberto Guerrero and Emerson Fittipaldi, whose experience is strictly on road courses. All of this seemed to create a division among fans and drivers.
What I see for the Indy, just a bunch of little rich kids that don't really race for a living. They just come into the thing and they buy a ride and they go fairly fast.
Two thoughts on it is, one thought is the closeness and the quick reactions you have to have running these cars in a tight group teaches you how to race and how to run traffic. But these cars, the difference is in these cars you're at the back of the car and you're the first one to know when the back end's going to get loose. In the speedway cars, you're at the front of the car, so you're the last one to know when the back end's going to get loose. So it takes a much finer feel.
The super modifieds, they have good power, but just doesn't get you the road racing experience that you need. Doing the midgets first is, it's a good way to start and all, but I think, once you get done with that, you got to move up into the formula cars and run the same circuits that the Indy cars are running.
Sprint car midget racing helps a lot when you're racing the Indy cars, like during the Indy 500, the race itself. But the practice and the qualification is just it just means laps. You have to do a lot of practicing and getting a lot of laps to be able to know how the car feels to go well over 200, 215 miles an hour, actually.
And IndyCar was looking across the country as well. Down in Daytona, their stock car competitors were leaving them behind. By the early 80s, NASCAR was viewed as America's top form of auto racing. They had more races, more sponsors, had more support from manufacturers, and attracted more teams. And also, it cost less money to run a full season.
Car owners generally agree now that to keep a car in the top 5 requires an annual budget of $5 million.
Some teams obtaining as much as $2 million to complete the full schedule of Winston Cup events.
When NASCAR races were held at the same time as IndyCar races, NASCAR was televised live, and IndyCar was delayed. When tracks like Phoenix and Pocono held both series, the NASCAR races had far more spectators. Not only was NASCAR beating IndyCar in almost every category, in the early 90s, one driver in particular made it all worse. Even then, people knew this was the most talented driver in decades, and even compared him to Richard Petty. He was a symbol of IndyCar's failure to embrace talent.
Hi, I'm Jeff Gordon. I'm 13 years old and I'm running sprint cars. My long trip goal is really to get in an IndyCar.
We're so accustomed to the old tradition when kids from Indiana got into sprint cars and midgets and their whole focus was spend their whole life trying to win the Indy 500. You're going a different direction. Why is that? And did you ever have any thoughts about Indy cars?
Oh yeah, you know, especially like you said, being down the road from the Indianapolis 500 track. I've gone to some races, and it wasn't that I was turned off by Indy cars. I enjoy Indy cars, and I looked at the ARS series, which I feel is a step to Indy cars, and then I looked at the Busch Grand National Series, which is a step to Winston Cup. And the opportunities were there with the stock cars, where they just didn't come along with the Indy cars. And
Jeff Gordon became America's most famous race car driver in the 90s, and he started out going up the IndyCar ladder. Traditional thinking said that sprint cars in Indiana should lead to the Indy 500. Instead, Gordon ended up in NASCAR and became their superstar.
I like Jeff Gordon. He's handsome.
Tony George understood a driver like Gordon would never be hired by an open-wheel team because, ironically, he had no road racing experience at the time. There were thousands of young drivers who raced on ovals, drivers with the potential to be national icons like Gordon, and every single one would go to NASCAR from that point forward. Road racers could adapt to ovals, but there was no expectation an oval driver could adapt to a road course.
I'm sad to see so many of our tremendous drivers ending up in NASCAR. It's a great series, and I go to all their races, but they don't need all of the best drivers. I'd like to see a few of them come to open wheel.
But despite its long list of problems in the late 80s, IndyCar was on the upswing by the mid-90s. It was a strong series that filled tracks with spectators and attracted some of the world's road racers like Emerson Fittipaldi, Nigel Mansell, and even Ayrton Senna, who tested once for Roger Penske and said he wanted to race an IndyCar after Formula One.
I might race anything, Indy or NASCAR, just for fun. It is going to be completely different for me.
By 1993, Ford returned to support IndyCar. Honda entered in 1994. More sponsorship was coming in, and the amount of entries per race was growing. But even that wasn't enough to put out the fire that was lit years before. Underneath the cigarette ads and aerodynamic bodies, there was a storm cloud on the horizon for IndyCar racing. The power was concentrated in the strong. The potential driver pool was limited. And there was the basic egotistical human nature that manifested itself in men who wanted control and wanted to prevent others from getting it. IndyCar needed a shakeup, but no one could have predicted how badly it would be shaken. The chain of events was set into motion in April 1993.
There will be a NASCAR Winston Cup stock car event here at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway. The name of the event will be the Brickyard 400, and it will be a 400-mile, 160-lap race.
While the Brickyard 400 could be a great event by itself, it would also be a huge moneymaker for the track, and Tony George could use that extra money to fund his own IndyCar series if he wanted. It was speculated that Bill France Jr. encouraged George to take power in IndyCar. In NASCAR, the France family controlled the biggest event in the entire series, and it worked very well for them. On January 7, 1994, Andrew Craig was named president of CART. Later that day, Tony George resigned from the board of directors.
Whether you consider IndyCar strong or in need of an infusion of new blood and ideas, Craig's message has been well defined. Get the ship running leaner and more efficient.
I think what race fans want more than anything else is they want really good value for money. We've all been to races that are disappointing, where you felt pushed and shoved and watched a race that was boring and uninteresting. I think our primary responsibility to race fans is to give them top quality racing that represents great value for money, so they leave the track or on TV, leave the race and say, that was terrific.
Unquestionably, the most terrific show is the Indianapolis 500, sanctioned by USAC, run by Tony George, the Speedway's president. When Craig was hired, George resigned from the IndyCar board. But Craig won't let that develop into a schism between the two parties.
I know that Tony has some very clear views, and obviously I respect those views, some very clear views about the sport and how it should develop. I intend, if he so wishes, and I believe he does from what I've said to him, from the discussions we've had so far, I intend that he and I should have a very regular and very open dialogue.
On March 11, 1994, while teams were in Australia for the season-opening race, George made an announcement back in Indianapolis. Unless things changed, he would create his own series.
The Indianapolis Motor Speedway issued a press release saying that there is the possibility they will create a whole new IndyCar series within the next 2 years. The Speedway president, Tony George, indicates he is dissatisfied with the current course of IndyCar racing. All other details will come out after this year's Indianapolis 500.
Well, I don't know that that it'll actually be new in that, it'll be totally different from what we have today. But I think, obviously, I have some strong feelings that I would like one last chance at trying to impress upon the kart organization, see if we can't, go forward together. But in the event that's not possible, then, maybe an entirely new series with more of an American flavor would be the result.
From IndyCar's point of view, it wasn't entirely a surprise. Certainly over the last few months, and indeed last couple of years, there has been a growing gap, if you like, in the philosophy between ourselves and the philosophy of the Speedway. So from our point of view, while we were perhaps surprised by the timing of the announcement, the direction and the content of the announcement was something which perhaps we'd already anticipated. My intention is to meet with Tony at the earliest possible stage to discuss with him what the issues are, what his concerns are. And I know he has very sincerely held views on this issue. To meet with him and to see if we can find common ground between the parties.
At Indianapolis in May 1994, the uncertain future of IndyCar racing hung over the event. Meanwhile, Team Penske unveiled their new private Mercedes engine, nicknamed the Beast. It cost a lot to develop. Penske cars hit 250 miles per hour entering Turn 3 in practice, and the team dominated the race. There were two reactions to Penske's win. Some called it a tremendous feat of engineering. Others said it was Penske using his wealth and his personal engine company for a huge advantage. In early July, the future was confirmed. The new Indy Racing League would officially debut in 1996. IndyCar racing was split once again. In August, the IRL announced they would use non-turbocharged V8 engines that would keep costs down. Kart would continue as an expensive series on mostly road courses, while the IRL was a cheaper series on ovals that encouraged the participation of American sprint car racers. If anything, the IRL was an attempt to copy some of what made NASCAR popular: strong American drivers on close, exciting ovals. That's what people wanted to see, or so they thought. What the split did was make the popularity gap between NASCAR and IndyCar even wider, as open-wheel racing began to devour itself. In 1995, IndyCar racing had big crowds, huge sponsors, growing field sizes, and most of their races on network television. But at this pinnacle moment, it was split in two. Blame for the open-wheel split fell on both sides. IRL management were vilified for their willingness to destroy a shaky but successful system to grab power. Kart owners were called an arrogant group of the rich, who drove away the man who controlled their biggest event. Just a few years prior, IndyCar was described as a battle between the naive and the stupid. Now people were forced to choose which one was more appealing. Throughout 1995, both sides made arguments why their series would be better when they went head-to-head in '96.
The IRL's objective of an oval-based series is predicated on the foundation that there are simply too many road and street courses presently offered. Often that leads to a lack of passing, which in turn translates to a lack of excitement for the spectators.
In the last several years, with the growth of NASCAR, people have begun to realize that if you're going to succeed in the United States, if you're going to compete for your television ratings and for your sponsorship, you got to be on ovals. Americans like to see the whole thing.
The IRL planned to end their season every year at the Indy 500, the biggest race and championship decided on one dramatic day, and they promised to pay more money than CART.
In addition to a minimum $1 million purse guaranteed for each event, the IRL will offer the only current $100,000 first-place payoff in Indianapolis car racing for events other than the Indy 500. Each IRL race will be televised live on ABC.
CART was an established product. They had the advantage of having the star drivers and teams that fans were connected to. The IRL promised to put excitement first, and the stars would eventually develop over time.
About 2 years ago, I went to, I think it was one of the CART road racing circuits. And spending all this time on ovals, all of a sudden, I understand why the public loves the ovals so much. I mean, everything that was exciting that happened on the corner where I wasn't. And I couldn't see anything. And whereas the oval, you could see it all.
I guess it's just the excitement. You never have time to relax or to settle down. There's always a race going on somewhere, and it's so intense.
We are seeing so many young drivers that race midget and sprint cars and other types of cars that are getting a chance that never would have under the other regime. And I think that's what has to be done, or what is direly needed, and why I'm supporting the Indy Racing League.
Opportunity, cost effectiveness, safety. Repaving a path to stardom. From the grassroots of American open wheel racing all the way to the Indianapolis 500. That's what the Pep Boys Indy Racing League is all about.
In addition to bigger purses, the IRL would cost far less to participate in. After using the 1995 CART rules for the first year, IRL would run non-turbocharged engines in different cars in 1997. An IRL engine would cost $75,000 and was owned by each team. In CART, teams leased engines for $140,000 each, and they needed to be rebuilt every 500 miles at a cost of $34,000. Leasing several engines, teams would spend around $2 million on engines for the entire season. An IRL chassis would cost roughly $263,000 and would be used for several years. Including parts, a CART chassis cost around $480,000, and a new design came out every year. With less cost to participate and bigger purses being offered, IRL teams could hire drivers based on talent instead of looking for drivers who brought money. Was this a serious plan for long-term sustainability, or just a petty battle for control? Reaction was mixed.
If we cut it by a half, that would be great. If we cut it by a third, that would be good. But I think we can cut it substantially.
I would say that on a per race basis, it's probably not going to be much cheaper than CART. I don't think anybody can accurately say what it's going to take. Let me rephrase that. What it's going to take to win races in IRL.
It isn't trying to help out the little guy, or it's for control of what has the potential of being an enormous business.
So it's not giving
and the rest
American...
of it is so much hooey.
I want to have some input into the direction that the sport goes. That's paramount. I think this institution has to have some input.
When the IRL put together their series, their biggest problem was a lack of established drivers. All the big names stayed in CART, and nobody knew who any of the IRL drivers were. Of those who found IRL rides, John Paul Jr., Arie Luyendyk, and Roberto Guerrero were the only three drivers who had ever won a race. Scott Brayton won the pole at Indy in 1995. Eddie Cheever spent 9 years in Formula One. The IRL was open to all teams and drivers. Kart teams were encouraged to compete, but no team decided to run both series because of a controversial rule and a resulting boycott. In July 1995, it was announced that the IRL would adopt a provisional system like NASCAR that guaranteed spots in races to the full-time teams.
The new scoring system is designed to provide starting slots at each venue to the top 75% of cars in the league standings. Thus, at Indianapolis, the leading 25 IRL participants would have spots secured in the field. But if and only if they can qualify within a predetermined percentage of that year's pole speed, whatever that might be.
The only thing that's happened is that the people who have come and raced with you all year, the people who have come and invested the money, sponsors who spent tremendous money on cars can expect that with a good team, with a job well done, with points well earned and properly accumulated, they're going to have a spot at all the races, and not just the Indy 500.
At the Indy 500, 25 teams would be locked into the field, and only 8 other cars that weren't series regulars would make the race. The 25-8 rule was one of the most important landmarks in the creation of the IRL. On the surface, it was done to protect teams that raced in the new series, but at the same time, the IRL could use this rule to force kart teams to run all the races if they wanted to run the Indy 500. If those teams ran the full schedule, George would in effect get the schedule he thought was best and have control over the rules. And with the IRL changing to a new rules package in 1997, kart might die at the end of 1996 because teams would want to run 2 different cars in both series. All teams would race in the series that had the Indy 500. It was a strategy that was possible to work. The IRL was very careful to create its schedule so there was no conflict with kart, and teams could run both series if they wanted in 1996. At first, the 25-8 rule was unpopular due to the fact that traditionally nothing was guaranteed at Indy. It was an open competition, where everyone had to earn their starting spots. In the years between 1993 and 1995, Bobby Rahal and Team Penske cars missed the race because they were too slow. No matter how much money you had, everyone was equal entering the Indy 500. Critics said the 25-8 rule took that away. But 2 months after the IRL schedule was released, a new kart race in Brazil was added to their schedule that created a conflict with the second IRL race in Phoenix. As kart teams now couldn't run all the IRL races, the 25-8 rule hurt them dearly.
We're being shut out of Indianapolis. We have 26 or 27 drivers here, and 8 of them would have been allowed to run Indianapolis. What would we do with the other 20 guys? Just send them home?
When they started to regulate who can and who can't run in the Super Bowl, it'd be like going to the Dallas Cowboys and saying, hey, you guys can't play this year.
So instead of joining the IRL, kart teams fought back and did so with strong destruction. On December 18, 1995, kart officially announced their battle plans. Instead of racing at Indy in May, they created the US 500, a 500-mile race at Michigan, a track owned by Roger Penske. Even more shocking, the race would be held at the same time as the Indy 500.
Their race is not political. It isn't between teams or cars or sponsors. Their race has nothing to do with tradition, history, and TV ratings. It isn't decided in headlines or boardrooms. It is a race that only they can create, and it cannot go on without them. It is 500 miles that won't even exist until the first of these men crosses the finish line. For this is a contest between men, the best in their sport, and it is defined by speed, time, and distance, not the place, not the track. It is a race between their fears and their dreams, and that race belongs to no one but them.
The US 500 was designed with the purpose of taking spectators and TV viewers away from the Indy 500, but that wasn't the only way kart fought the IRL. In January, A.J. Foyt filed a lawsuit against kart saying they were pressuring major companies not to sponsor IRL teams, and this cost Foyt's team over $5 million.
Foyt's attorneys say that for one, Texaco advised the owner that it would not provide sponsorship in 1996 nor associate itself with the IRL. Indycar released a statement saying only that the suit is baseless and without merit. Attorneys for both sides are to meet April 22nd in Houston. That's Foyt's hometown.
Not only was open-wheel racing split, but now both sides were actively trying to hurt each other. It was only going to get worse from there.
The Magic Kingdom, the home of Mickey Mouse, and an IndyCar race? That's right, the inaugural Indy 200 at Walt Disney World is set to take place Saturday, January 27th on the newly constructed 1-mile tri-oval just inside the main gates of the Magic Kingdom. The 200-mile event will feature a $1 million purse and will be televised live by ABC television.
Well, I think what's going to happen is probably one of the greatest venues and races to come off in the last quarter of a century.
To start the IRL, Tony George and Disney World built a 1-mile oval inside the world's most popular theme park. To hold a race at such a venue was seen as a major success for the new series. The first IRL race was scheduled for January 27th, one day before the Super Bowl. The idea was that when people opened the sports page on Super Bowl Sunday, they would read about the IRL race. The drivers in the event were underdogs, to say the least. Butch Brickell was a stuntman who raced powerboats. Stan Wattles was a sports car racer who once worked in a Connecticut school as a teaching aide for kids with learning disabilities. John Paul Jr. returned to full-time racing for the first time since he spent 2.5 years in jail in the late 80s when he wouldn't testify against his drug-smuggling father. Jim Buick was a 55-year-old commercial airline pilot whose last IndyCar race was in 1981. Tony Turco, Rick DeLorto, and Bill Demporo raced in the American IndyCar Series, a short-lived series that raced outdated IndyCars. At Disney, Buick, DeLorto, and Demporo were sent home because mechanical issues kept them from completing their driving tests. In practice for the race, Chilean driver Eliseo Salazar suffered a broken leg in a hard crash.
We're ready for the inaugural event in the Indy Racing League here at Walt Disney World. They began a while ago with the opening ceremonies with that most typical Disney flair.
Before the race at Disney, 400 doves were released into the air, and a sold-out crowd of 51,000 fans filled the stands. A ceremonial brick from the Indianapolis Motor Speedway was placed at the track. Donald Trump walked around pit road and was presented in newspapers as evidence that celebrities liked the new series.
Oh, it's really beautiful, really great.
Roy E. Disney. Lady and gentlemen, start your engines.
The dream is real. The green flag is out from Blaine Sweeney, and Buddy Lazier jumps into the lead.
The race was won by Buzz Calkins. Before that, Buzz had only 2 podiums in 3 years in Indy Lights. The next IRL race was 2 months later in Phoenix, won easily by Arie Luyendyk. Buddy Lazier was hospitalized in intensive care after breaking his pelvis and a vertebrae in a practice crash. If the IRL was a series meant to provide young sprint car drivers with big opportunities, the embodiment was Tony Stewart. In 1995, the 24-year-old was the first to win 3 USAC championships in 1 year. In the first 2 IRL races, Stewart proved sprint car drivers could easily adapt to driving Indy cars, and he led both races. Driving for Team Menard, he promised to be a threat to win the Indy 500. Undoubtedly, he never would have gotten a ride in kart.
I got where I'm at through hard work and determination, and there's just as many guys out here with determination as there are, with talent. So they just need to keep plugging and keep getting on the phone and calling these guys, because I think we're going to open up their eyes to some midget sprint car guys. I think it'll work. You just got to keep after it.
When May rolled around, the Indy 500 attracted even more interesting drivers. Bronco Brad Murphy was an Arizona rodeo cowboy who hadn't driven a race car in 7 years. 00 Joe Gosick was one of the best super-modified drivers in the Northeast. 24-year-old Rayson Gardner was the youngest driver to go over 500 miles per hour at Bonneville. He spent 2 years in the American IndyCar Series. Scott Harrington drove in 1 kart race back in 1989. To get in the Indy 500, Harrington gave up everything he owned.
Rookie Scott Harrington has spent every available penny to finance his team. He sold his vintage 77 Porsche along with fiancée Tracy's Mustang. Over the past 3 weeks, they've maxed their credit cards, received an eviction notice, and had the power shut off in their apartments.
Harrington drove to the track each day in a borrowed 1987 Ford Tempo. Newspapers told the story of a local racing fan who sent him $2,000 to support his team. The oldest car in the field was a 1991 Lola, entered by Loophole Racing. It was the same car that Danny Sullivan finished 10th with in the 1991 Indy 500. It had since raced in the American Indycar series, then was converted to compete in the Pikes Peak Hill Climb. USAC midget racer Dan Drinan was the driver, mechanic, and engineer for Loophole. In the 80s, he worked as a mechanic on the teams of Mario and Michael Andretti. In 1992, he barely survived a terrible midget wreck.
The car that took the wildest ride was USAC midget points leader Dan Drinan.
And then there was Team Scandia, owned by Andy Evans, the Wall Street investment manager for Bill Gates. As a driver, he won the 12 Hours of Sebring in 1995 and 97. In 1996, he bought IMSA, Sebring International Raceway, and Mosport. Scandia entered a record 7 cars in the Indy 500, and all of them qualified. Along with Tony Stewart came a flood of USAC racers. A whopping 34 drivers attended USAC's rookie meeting at the start of the month. Even drivers who didn't have rides, like Kenny Irwin, Doug Kalita, and Jack Hewitt were there. The car that Roberto Guerrero won the pole with in 1992 was rented by Tony George for rookies to take the rookie test in, so they could at least pass the test before they found a ride for the race. Indy was freshly repaved over the winter, and the new asphalt meant speeds would be at an all-time high, and people at home got to see every bit of the chaos. For the first time in Indy 500 history, every day of practice was televised. ESPN2 had 3 hours of live practice coverage every day. And amid all this, people were more unhappy than ever. For the first time, the best drivers and teams were skipping the Indy 500. With a serious chance that the US 500 might grow into a better race, the Indy 500 might never again be as big as it once was. Robin Miller of the Indianapolis Star was vocal in his belief that track management was destroying everything that made the Indy 500 great. Open competition, the best competitors. Indianapolis area Target stores briefly refused to carry Indy 500 merchandise in support of CART. In the lead-up, even retired drivers were taking sides. Mario Andretti called the IRL a, quote, travesty to the sport.
To have a totally oval series, you almost have to go back to the 50s. Why do we want to go back to the 50s? Times have changed, guys.
Mario even said he would come out of retirement to run the US 500 if it wouldn't distract from Michael Andretti's championship hopes. 54-year-old Gary Bettenhausen entered the US 500 in a team owned by his brother Tony. A.J. Foyt offered to enter 56-year-old Al Unser Sr. in the Indy 500. Big Al turned down the offer after a few days' deliberation. Foyt himself didn't think he could lose enough weight to fit in an Indycar, or he too would be in the race. 59-year-old Gordon Johncock was looking for a ride at Indy as well. With friends turned into enemies, institutions torn apart, and race cars at the fastest in their history, the month of May in 1996 was unlike anything seen before or since.
Michigan International Speedway, known for great racing, and 1995 was no exception. Unscheduled pit stops, accidents, and driver frustration all came into play as the afternoon sun beamed down on the 2-mile oval. But it all came down to the final few laps in a battle of nerves between Al Unser Jr. and Scott Pruitt. Numerous lead changes, but Scott Pruitt on the final lap passed to take his very first IndyCar win. Now, coming to Michigan International on May 26th, a new race and a new tradition, and the excitement of the IndyCars will be evident. The greatest names in the sport will be there for the inaugural US 500. Michael Andretti, Emerson Fittipaldi, Al Unser Jr., Robbie Gordon, Bobby Rahal, Paul Tracy, Jimmy Vasser, Christian Fittipaldi, Scott Pruitt, and Brian Herta. All of the stars of Indycar at the US 500 on the Memorial Day weekend, Sunday, May 26th, live here on ESPN.
When CART wanted to compete with the Indy 500, they didn't go to a road course. They scheduled the US 500 at Michigan International Speedway, a track owned by Roger Penske. Michigan was the fastest track Indycar raced at. The track record was 234 miles per hour, set by Mario Andretti. This was slightly faster than the record at Indy, which was 232 miles per hour, set by Roberto Guerrero in 1992. Michigan had the speed and excitement to compete with Indianapolis. They had the drivers, and whoever won the US 500 would earn $1 million, just slightly less than the Indy 500 winner. The US 500 was designed to copy some of Indy's schedule. Qualifying for the race would take place on the same weekend as Indy, giving each organization 2 weeks to promote the pole sitter for each race. Like a political campaign, CART stakeholders fought to convince fans that their event would be great, while the Indy 500 would be terrible. After 79 Indy 500s, perhaps the Speedway thought too highly of themselves.
They certainly want the world to stand still, or perhaps I put it another way, they want the world to revolve around the Indianapolis Motor Speedway.
Michael Andretti repeatedly claimed the Indy 500 would put people in danger. With inexperienced drivers and the highest speeds ever, he predicted a race full of crashes and injuries. Michael's critics pointed out that he himself was currently on probation with CART for causing too many crashes. The idea of ignoring the other event and focusing on their own was something neither series could do.
I didn't just fall off the turnip truck. I've been around a little while, and I've had a lot of interaction with a lot of the drivers and car owners. I've gotten to know their personalities pretty well, and a lot of it's not surprising to me.
While the US 500 had the stars of IndyCar, it lacked the national attention of the Indy 500 and the tradition that came with 80 years of experience. As hard as they tried, these were problems CART couldn't overcome, as they desperately tried to put together a race with only 5 months to do so. Originally, CART wanted the US 500 on network TV to fight the Indy 500 head-to-head. CBS or Fox were potential candidates, but a deal wasn't reached, and the race was carried by ESPN. Already, the first battle was lost. Looking for tradition, the US 500 invoked the oldest international race, the Vanderbilt Cup. Originally held between 1904 and 1916, the race attracted the world's best teams in the early days of auto racing. A replica of the original Vanderbilt Cup trophy would be given to the winner. Both sides created the best product they could, knowing that May of 1996 could change the direction of IndyCar forever. But like every year, the attention was on Indy. The first 2 days of Indy 500 practice were washed out by rain. When the skies cleared on Monday morning, Tony Stewart completed his rookie test and ran a practice lap of 237.336 miles per hour, easily the fastest in the history of the track.
Seems like my driving style really likes this type of car, and the more experience and more time I'm running, the better off I'm getting with it.
That same day, the Indianapolis Motor Speedway filed a lawsuit against CART, forbidding them from using the name Indycar, which was a trademark owned by the Speedway. Without Indy in their schedule, CART wouldn't be allowed to have Indy in their name. 3 days later, Thursday's practice saw Arie Luyendyk pass Stewart's record speed with a lap of 237.7 miles per hour. Off the track, Tony George openly considered expanding the starting field beyond the traditional 33 because there were so many cars entered. Ultimately, that wasn't done. On Fast Friday practice, Luyendyk ran the fastest lap in Indy history.
Guess why those guys are smiling? Arie Luyendyk just went 239.260 miles per hour at Indianapolis. Luyendyk has upped the ante again.
Meanwhile, in Michigan, CART drivers called the rising speeds at Indy artificial, and Michael Andretti said it was simply the result of more turbo boost than in past years. A.J. Foyt responded by saying Michael had been a, quote, crybaby all his life, just like his father. At Indy, team owner John De La Pena claimed Luyendyk and the Menard cars had illegal levels of turbo boost. Tony Stewart said that everyone would be happier if De La Pena was loaded onto a truck and sent to Michigan. Entering the first weekend of time trials, the new qualifying system was the main topic. Of course, the top 25 cars and points were locked into the race, but this wasn't an absolute guarantee. For the first time since 1963, there was a minimum speed requirement to qualify for the race. Any speed slower than 220 miles per hour would be disallowed. Despite the guaranteed starting spots, pole qualifying in 1996 produced high drama. 3 minutes into morning practice, Arie Luyendyk nearly lost his car when Johnny Parsons crashed ahead of him. 20 minutes later, engine problems threatened Luyendyk's chance for the pole. Tony Stewart set the pace in qualifying. He ran an average speed of 233.1 miles per hour and officially broke the track record. Stewart's time on the pole held for another 3 hours. With little less than 30 minutes left in qualifying, Luyendyk finally had a new engine in his car and made his run. With a track record speed of 233.3 miles per hour, he knocked Stewart off the pole.
It is a new track record. He is on the pole. Arie Luyendyk is on the pole with a 233.390 miles an hour.
But then something unexpected happened. Scott Brayton's team withdrew his car from the race. As the rules stated, you couldn't requalify a car once it completed a run. So Brayton's team withdrew his 6th fastest speed, pulled out his backup car, and sent him back on track to fight for his 2nd straight pole.
He's got the pole, baby! And he did it! He did it! A new 4-lap record! A new 4-lap record!
Brayton's massive gamble paid off. His pole run was one of the most memorable moments in qualifying history. Hours later, it was discovered that Luyendyk's car was 7 pounds too light, and his qualifying run was disqualified. The front row was now Brayton, Stewart, and Davy Jones. In Michigan, qualifying for the US 500 was marred by cold temperatures of 42 degrees and a wind that made it feel below freezing. Jimmy Vasser won the pole with a speed of 232 miles per hour, under Indy's time.
And you won't believe it, over 236 miles an hour, and it's a new track record. And he did it again. It's a new track record. 236.948 miles an hour, and how? Over 237 miles an hour. And it's another new track record. 237.498 miles an hour. How do you like that? Arie Luyendyk, a new track record, 10 miles.
Arie Luyendyk made up for his Saturday disappointment with an even faster run. Because he qualified on the second day, however, Luyendyk would start 21st. To keep costs down in 1996, all cars in the IRL had to be at least 1 year old. While kart teams wouldn't run in the new series, they gladly sold their cars to IRL teams. Buddy Lazier's car was a former Chip Ganassi Reynard, driven by Jimmy Vasser in '95. Johnny Unser qualified using the car Scott Goodyear nearly won with the year before. Scott Harrington's Lola was the same one that A.J. Foyt drove in his final Indy 500 in 1992. Brayton's pole-winning car was the same one that Luyendyk finished 7th with in 1995. And Arie Luyendyk's record car was a 1994 Reynard that was Jacques Villeneuve's backup car in 1994 and crashed by Johnny Parsons in practice in 1995. Before 1971, dirt tracks were part of the Indycar schedule. The decision to take them off the schedule hurt sprint car drivers in finding rides at Indy. In 1974, USAC banned rear-engine sprint cars from competition. This made the difference between sprint cars and Indy cars even greater, and the road to Indy much tougher. For the IRL, Tony Stewart was the perfect example that sprint car drivers could still easily adapt to Indy. But he also angered kart drivers in Michigan when he said that anyone who could race a midget at Winchester would have no trouble running at Indy. Dan Drynan also said that an Indy car was easier to drive than a midget. Up in Michigan, Jimmy Vasser said that was ridiculous, that he would do a lot better at Winchester than Stewart could do it on a street course. Stewart also said that anyone who wanted to, quote, buy a name was racing at Michigan, and that all the real race car drivers were in Indianapolis. On track at Indy, the second week of practice started in a relaxed manner. The only cautions were for animals. A yellow was thrown when a chipmunk got onto the front stretch, and 2 separate yellows were thrown when a mother duck and 9 ducklings twice walked onto the track in turn 1. 2 veteran drivers walked through the garage area and talked to team owners, hoping to race someone's backup car. Rumors said that 59-year-old Gordon Johncock might qualify a car for Ron Himmelgarn if Brad Murphy could qualify. If that happened, Johncock would become the oldest driver to attempt the Indy 500, passing the record set by 59-year-old James Reynolds, who failed to qualify in 1919. On Thursday, 54-year-old Danny Ongaias got a ride in an uncompetitive car owned by Butch Brickell. The flying Hawaiian hadn't driven at Indy since 1987 and was a long shot to qualify. Later that day, Scott Harrington crashed the race car he sold his Porsche to buy. The car AJ Foyt drove in his final Indy 500 was damaged beyond repair. The man who sacrificed so much was in serious trouble.
Harrington is all right, but his Indy dreams suffer a major setback.
Then, on Friday, tragedy struck. Scott Brayton was practicing Tony Stewart's backup car when he suffered a punctured right rear tire entering turn 2.
We take you immediately to Indianapolis Motor Speedway for an update on the condition of the pole sitter Scott Brayton, who suffered a bad accident about 4 hours ago.
May 17th, 1996, 4 p.m. Race car driver Scott Brayton, 37, of Coldwater, Michigan, died at 12:50 p.m. local time today at Methodist Hospital of Indiana. Brayton's death was due to injuries sustained in an accident which occurred at 12:17 p.m. today at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway during practice for this year's Indianapolis 500.
Brayton died instantly of a basilar skull fracture. It was the first time the pole sitter lost his life before the race. Tony Stewart inherited the pole from his fallen teammate, and at 24 years old became the youngest pole sitter since Rex Mays in 1936. Scott Brayton was one of the most respected drivers at Indianapolis. He raced underfunded Indycars since 1981 and never won a race. His positive attitude and passion for the history of Indianapolis made him a fan favorite. After winning the pole for the 1995 Indy 500, Brayton laid on the track and kissed the Yard of Bricks, one of the first people to start this annual tradition. On Saturday morning, Dan Drynan crashed his 1991 car and flipped in turn 1. He suffered a concussion, broken hip, broken foot, and a bruised lung. That night, the Speedway held an emotional memorial service for Brayton.
Scott Brayton, his very name will forever bring cheers at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, because he did it. He qualified. He was a record holder. He sat on the pole. And we pay tribute to him tonight.
Exactly who would take over Brayton's car was the subject of much speculation on Saturday. Team owner John Menard wanted a veteran driver. Rumors pointed toward 56-year-old Al Unser, who earlier turned down a ride with AJ Foyt, 46-year-old Danny Sullivan, who was broadcasting a race for ABC, or the 59-year-old Johncock, who was Brayton's mentor in the early 80s. All were at the track on Saturday. Ultimately, Unser suggested Menard pick a fourth option. On Sunday morning, Team Menard announced that Danny Ongaias would drive Brayton's car in the race. At 54 years old, there was a 35-year age gap between Ongaias and 19-year-old Michel Jourdain, the largest gap in race history. With 35 minutes left in bump day, Billy Boat crashed hard in turn 1 and missed the race. With 20 minutes left, Scott Harrington was thrown a lifeline and qualified for the race. It was unlikely he would have made the race with his first car, but with the backup provided by De La Pena Motorsports, Harrington picked up an additional 13 miles per hour. 00 Joe Gosick was the last driver to bump into the field. 17 rookies would start the Indy 500. The week leading up to the Indy 500 was filled with pessimism. On Wednesday, the pole sitter was buried in Michigan. There was a big drop in attendance during practice, and tickets to the race were easy to get.
How's business? It's terrible. It's bad. Can't even get face value out the seats.
Any other year, these $50 ones, which is in J, on the fourth turn would bring $150 a piece. Today, you're lucky to get 50 on them.
The month has been a disaster. People have not showed up, and they're going to blame the weather. But I've been out here when there's been 100,000 people in the rain for 10 hours hoping the qualifying opens.
The race was expected to be a runaway victory for Arie Luyendyk. Fans were divided and strong in their opinions that the other side was ruining IndyCar.
As the engines roared to life for the inaugural US 500, in the center of all the power stood a silver-haired general, leaving nothing to chance. This year, the general's army, shut out at last year's Indy 500, was instead doing battle in Michigan. His legion of red and white shirted soldiers, part of a feverish frontline war with the IRL.
Fans at Indy wore shirts criticizing CART. Roger Penske was the most hated man in Indiana. First because of his years spent turning racing into a big business that encouraged money over talent, then seemingly creating a new race to hurt Indy when his financial advantage was taken away.
The big Roger Penske. Where in the hell was Roger Penske made? Right here at this damn racetrack. He damn sure didn't make this place like A.J. Foyt didn't, or Wilbur Shaw, or whoever. And when I'm sick and tired of hearing the crap, and I'll tell you why, because like Mario, like they made Indianapolis, they made.
Invoking more war analogies, Foyt also said that holding a race at the same time as the Indy 500 took more guts than Hitler. For years, fans had criticized Penske for his role as one of the lead decision-makers in CART. In 1996, IRL supporters felt justified.
Roger Penske is painted as the bogeyman in this thing. Some places, if you would read, you know, he's the one pulling all the strings, but the reality is that the 19 owners are very uniform in their feelings for what this sport needs to go forward into the future.
At Michigan, CART supporters wore no IRL shirts. People were even turning on the media. Indianapolis journalist Robin Miller was vilified for his criticism of Speedway management. Letters to local newspapers called him a hypocrite for having experienced Indy in the 1960s while also defending the rich megateams that boycotted Indy. Up in Michigan, CART struggled to build excitement. Drivers spent weeks telling fans that their race would be better.
The gist of it is the best drivers in the world, best crews in the world are racing in Michigan this year.
It would be great to be in Indianapolis. If you have the greatest spectacle in racing, you deserve to have the best race. And this year, that's not what they have. The best race is here in Michigan.
For all the anticipation that should be on Memorial Day weekend, almost no one was excited. Even at Michigan, everyone gave the impression they missed Indy.
We all want to be at Indianapolis. I mean, don't get us wrong. We all want to be there, but we want to be there with the best 33 cars.
When you're there and Jim Nabors is singing that song, whether you're from Indiana or not, your eyes get a little moist. In fact, just the thought of Jim Nabors moistens my eyes.
When I dream about the moonlight on the Wabash, how I long for my Indiana home. Jim Nabors. To your cars, please. All drivers to their cars.
Ladies and gentlemen, start your engines.
And on the outside, Salazar pushes a little bit ahead. The row not aligned at the moment, but still we watch for the green flag. And there it is. Here we go. We're racing. As Tony Stewart in a drag race with Salazar leads them into the first turn. Tony Stewart leads into turn one across the short chute.
The early laps were marred by several harmless spins.
The inside it looked like, and that twisted him around. We actually have two situations working. We have Scott Harrington, who got in trouble, and there he is, as he came flying up on the back of the field and then shocked the brakes, and that got him down on the inside, but look how he kept that off the wall. Looks like a problem with Paul Duran's car. Smoke at the back. He gets it on to the access road down to the pits, and he loses it. Stay down, stay down, stay down, stay down. Whoa. Yellow flag, of course, is out. The rest of the field comes by.
I don't know what happened
high
there,
in the groove.
He just looked like maybe he just stood on the gas too hard and turned that car sideways.
Stewart set a record for rookies by leading the first 31 laps. Once Stewart pitted, that gave the lead to Roberto Guerrero, and then Buddy Lazier, who was making his comeback from back injuries 2 months earlier. Stewart reassumed the lead after pit stops.
We have a car smoking badly on the racetrack. Johnny Parsons, he's in front of you, Ken Double.
Indeed, and there is a lot of smoke coming out of the backside of that car. He has moved to the inside of the back straightaway.
Under the fourth caution of the day, Stewart pitted again, which gave the lead back to Guerrero. He held the lead until a debris caution came out on lap 70. Guerrero's career at Indy was defined by strong runs and unfortunate problems that cost him shots at victory. Even in the IRL, bad luck had followed him.
They're going to take a little extra time getting the fuel in. They have yet to drop him. This is a long stop, and they've got a problem with the fueler. The fueler is apparently not in. Fuel is not feeding to Roberto Guerrero's car. They pulled it out now 2-3 times, and it is not releasing fuel, apparently. They finally got the car down, and he's killed the engine. So this is really disastrous for Roberto Guerrero. They're trying to calm him down in the pit. He has got his guys over the wall, still talking to him. Guerrero now refired, and he is back underway 1 minute and 5 seconds.
At the same time, Tony Stewart started having boost pressure problems related to the turbocharger pop-off valve.
And the report is that Tony Stewart's engine may not be sounding at full song.
When the race restarted, Davy Jones led, followed by Buddy Lazier and Stewart.
Across the North Short Chute, that engine sounds very sour.
Got him in front of me, and again, moving slowly. Certainly hasn't got the zip in that engine, and now it's blown. A big puff of smoke out of the back of Tony Stewart's car, dead center on the back straightaway.
Wow, there's a sick feeling in the cockpit of car number 20, and a sick feeling in the entire town of Rushville, Indiana. The Rushville Rocket, his day apparently is over.
Pre-race favorite Arie Luyendyk slowly climbed his way up to second by lap 90.
Just ahead of the leader of the race. This gives Luyendyk an opportunity. They're on the backstretch as they close in, but the yellow comes out. And
number 10 over here.
Number
10 car. The number 10 car, Brad Murphy, just came off of turn 2, whacked the wall pretty good, got sparks and fire off the magnesium wheels.
A turning point in the race came under caution. Exiting the pits, Luyendyk and Eliseo Salazar collided.
And then this happened with Salazar. Salazar just drifted right down into the side, got up on the track, through the mud, stayed on the track. Both cars were able to continue on.
Well, he didn't just drift down, he turned down and already had the lead. Right here you'll see this yellow, see that cone on the left? Boom, he's there, he's in front, and Salazar just comes down.
Totally Salazar's fault.
Luyendyk lost 5 laps repairing a damaged suspension. With the favorite gone, the race was now completely wide open. The Indy 500 went back to green around 2 o'clock. At that time, the US 500 was about to begin.
The field, perhaps the most qualified in IndyCar history. World championships in both Formula One cars and sports cars. 7 IndyCar titles, 131 total IndyCar victories between them. Jimmy Vasser, who has won 3 of the first 5 races of the season and is the points leader coming into this race, will bring the field up to speed. And we have a crash in turn 4. A crash approaching the green flag, and many, many cars are involved.
Well, something has obviously gone wrong.
This was a huge embarrassment for CART. After spending months proclaiming their drivers to be the best, they couldn't even make it to the green flag without crashing 13 cars. CART delayed the start of the race by 1 hour for teams to prepare their backup cars.
What's our situation right now, Kurt, regarding the use of backup cars for this race?
Well, our rules provide that in a situation like this, since our leader did not complete a full lap before we went red, the race will restart in its entirety. That allows all the competitors in the pit lane to reorganize. Anybody that has damage that requires a backup car will be allowed to put that backup car in its original starting position.
We look like idiots now, huh? Why? The starts and a little bit, yeah.
He was laughing, and so was Tony George.
Yeah, I know.
Oh, Jesus. Can you believe it?
Bad.
Oh, God.
Hi again, everybody. Brett Haber back in the ESPN studios. We remain in that red flag condition at the US 500. We are going to get you back out to the race in just a couple of minutes, but this gives us an opportunity to catch you up to date on the other big race. There are now two big races on Memorial Day weekend. Of course, the Indy 500 taken over by the IRL. It is about 3/4 complete even as we speak, and we check the leaderboard once again, and still Roberto Guerrero leading the race. 150 laps are in the books. Davy Jones is in second, Buddy Lazier in third.
After several close calls in the last 10 years, Guerrero was on the verge of an Indy 500 win, but it appeared fuel strategy would decide if he finally won. Guerrero pitted on lap 159, which cycled the lead of the race to Buddy Lazier. Davy Jones was on the same strategy as Roberto. If the race stayed green, both drivers would have to pit again with 2 laps to go. And 2 laps later, the caution came out.
Oh, the yellow comes out. This is going to hurt. When?
Whoa, whoa! 2 cars together there.
Like Lynn St. James, we want to be careful on the identity of the other car. We think it might be Harrington, but as we said earlier, those cars, it looks to be the 44 car, the yellow and black one. That would be Harrington. So.
Now leading, Buddy Lazier made his final stop under caution. Guerrero pitted again to top off on fuel. Unfortunately, this stop proved disastrous.
Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, we got a problem in the Roberto Guerrero pit. They were trying to fuel him. There is a fire. There's a fire in the pit area. They are now throwing water all over the Roberto Guerrero car. They were not able to get the fueling device in correctly. The fueler has come behind the tank. He has been doused with a tank of water, and now they are hot. And I mean that literally and figuratively. He has shut off the engine. That could have finished the day for Roberto Guerrero, and they are very, very upset here.
And Roberto Guerrero begins to climb out of the car.
This gave the lead back to Davy Jones, who was just trying to stretch his fuel to the end of the race. At the front of the field, Eliseo Salazar was the first car in line behind the pace car, but running 2 laps down after his crash with Lyondike. When the green came out, Team Scandia gave him orders to block Jones and help his teammate Alessandro Zampedri.
Tries to make a move to the inside, still trying. Salazar's taking him all the way to the wall. Took him all the way to the wall.
That's really not good. That's Salazar. 2 times now he's done that today.
And there goes Zampedri. Zampedri goes for the lead of the race, and Zampedri's got it.
And Davey looked like he's slowing down. He might be just gathering himself up. But Salazar obviously didn't want to lose another lap.
What Eliseo Salazar did for Zampedri coming down the straights here allowed Zampedri to go around Davy Jones and won. That's teamwork.
What did he do exactly?
He covered his line all the way down the pit line, and he allowed Zampedri to go on the outside of Jones into 1.
So Johnny Rutherford had admission that Eliseo Salazar's move here as they came down was an intentional block of Davy Jones so that his teammate Alessandro Zampedri could get by him. It could have resulted in a disaster here on the straightaway because Jones came very close to hitting the wall as opposed to brushing it.
Well, it really could, and I'm not real fond of that, but you know, that's racing, as they say, and you know why he pulled over to block him or what the situation was, we may never know, but if it was in fact that, then it doesn't make me very happy.
The Italian driver held the lead for the next 20 laps, but with 11 laps to go, Jones fought back.
Whoa, and he's running up high there. Zampedri ran up high and looked at Davy.
And Davy Jones said maybe that's the fuel story there as Jones comes to the front.
With Jones back in the lead, he was forced to save fuel.
Yeah, but Jones is not out of the woods. You saw him as he just passed out of view. There he is up in the corner of the screen. And I'll tell you what, I think Lazier is able to reel him in.
And I don't think Lazier, for example, has any problem with the fuel. He's just had tough times with the traffic he's had at that.
Well, he's just radioed.
Here comes Lazier. Lazier charges on Jones. He moves to the inside of him, and Buddy Lazier picks up the lead of the 500 with 8 laps to go.
You can see how important it is. There is nothing like the excitement you get at the end of the Indy race.
It appeared Lazier had the race locked up until 5 laps to go.
Scott Sharp catches the wall at Indy. Fire on the back of the car. That's just an oil fire on the turbocharger, but
Lazier had broken his back 2 months earlier at Phoenix. By this point in the race, it was hurting so badly that he tried to stretch his arm out of the cockpit under caution to relieve the pain. The crash was cleared in time for a 1-lap shootout to end the race. With a lap car between Lazier and Jones, Buddy had clear sailing toward the finish.
The 1996 Indianapolis 500 is won by Buddy Lazier. Davy Jones finishes in second position. Crash in 4. Big crash in turn 4.
Guerrero. A big crash. Roberto Guerrero. We've also got a second car that flipped over as it came down the straightaway coming off of 4. Guerrero winds up in the pits
it's Sam
sideways.
And Hearn,
when Guerrero got out of his car during the pit fire, his radio wasn't reconnected. He said that had he known he was a lap ahead of 6th place, he wouldn't have been running as hard. Zampedri was seriously injured, suffering broken legs, dislocated ankles, and broken feet. The Indy 500 was also the deciding race for the IRL Championship, and that ended in controversy as well. With only 3 races on the schedule, the points were incredibly close. Richie Hearn's 3rd place finish tied him with Roberto Guerrero for 4th place. His bad pit stop may have cost him the race and the championship. Robbie Buell's 9th place finish put him 3rd in the standings, and at the top of the points there was a tie between Buzz Calkins and Scott Sharp. Even though Calkins won a race and Sharp did not, the IRL rulebook said nothing about tiebreakers, and thus the drivers were named co-champions. In spite of all that had happened, the Indy 500 was a success in almost every way. The rookie drivers raced respectfully. Tony Stewart proved sprint car drivers could still lead Indy. The only driver who faced criticism was Salazar, and he was in his 2nd Indy 500. The race had different strategies. Several drivers had chances to win, and the victory was taken by an underdog American driver who never had a good opportunity in kart. For all the criticism the Indy 500 took as being a race filled with rookies, the US 500 was dominated by a rookie as well. Alex Zanardi led 134 laps before losing an engine. Using his backup car, Jimmy Vasser won by 10 seconds. While the US 500 wasn't a sellout crowd with spectators, the TV ratings were good. 1.9 million people watched the race, the largest audience ever for an IndyCar race on ESPN. But as expected, ratings for the Indy 500 were far better, as 6.4 million people watched it. Tony George refused to comment on the state of the US 500. The head-to-head battle was won by the IRL. It may have been the biggest battle, but the war would still rage on. Ever since people started lining racetracks with concrete walls, drivers were killed in crashes against them. From short tracks to professional circuits, the unforgiving surface claimed hundreds of lives. By the early 90s, the only softwall option was to line a track with styrofoam or tires. Tony George made developing softwalls a major priority for Indianapolis and the IRL. In 1998, they installed a device called the PEDS barrier to their inside walls. The wall absorbed energy, but came apart in a crash. Looking for a better system, George approached the University of Nebraska about developing something different. He funded the early engineering that created the safer barrier, and Indianapolis was the first track to install it in 2002.
The second crash appears just as destructive as the first. But computer readings from the car's crash recorders tell a different story. At the point of impact, the safer barrier begins to absorb the force of the crash. This force dissipates as the crash continues and protects the driver in the cockpit.
No driver has ever died after hitting a safer barrier. If anything good came out of the IndyCar split, it was this new push for driver safety. A major effect of the IndyCar split was the effect it had on the popularity of open-wheel racing. The split came at a time when NASCAR was exploding in popularity and IndyCar was destroying itself. At first, NASCAR's growth didn't come at IndyCar's expense. In July 1995, an ESPN poll showed that 30% of American auto racing fans said NASCAR was their favorite form of the sport. By contrast, 25% said IndyCar was their favorite. By March 1996, NASCAR had grown to 41%, while IndyCar shrunk only slightly to 23.8%. But by the late 90s, NASCAR's extreme growth left IndyCar far behind. Even in Indianapolis, NASCAR was more popular than IndyCars. By 2000, people were even more excited about NASCAR's Brickyard 400 than the Indy 500. It was reported that the cheapest seat for the Brickyard 400 cost $125, while a ticket to the Indy 500 cost only $75. In the 1970s, pole day qualifying for the Indy 500 drew over 200,000 fans in attendance. In 2000, an estimated 20,000 people came to Indy qualifying. In contrast, 50,000 people watched Brickyard 400 qualifying. After 1996, CART never again scheduled a race on the same day as the Indy 500. The Michigan 500 in late July was renamed the US 500. After 1999, the US 500 name was dropped completely from the schedule. At first, the IRL wanted to end their season every year at the Indy 500, but in October 1996, Tony George announced they would instead finish their championship in the fall, like every other series. It was said that sponsors didn't like their advertising budgets being spent over 2 calendar years for one IRL season. Safety in IndyCar in the late 90s was a major issue as well. 2 months after Scott Brayton's death at Indy, Jeff Krosnoff was killed in a kart race on the streets of Toronto. In 1997, the IRL moved to slower, non-turbocharged engines in spec cars, which dropped speeds and made racing safer. CART continued on their direction of supercars with big engines and massive speeds. In 1998, 3 fans were killed at the US 500 when a wheel flew into the grandstand. In 1999, 3 fans were killed at an IRL race in Charlotte by flying wheels. In the fall of 1999, CART lost 2 drivers in crashes, rookie Gonzalo Rodriguez and superstar Greg Moore. The IRL struggled to grow in its first few years. They suffered a major embarrassment at Texas in 1997 when a scoring error declared the wrong driver as the winner. For the first 2 years, USAC officials were in charge of scoring the races. The IRL ended this relationship in the aftermath. Their new, slower cars were no match for CART's exciting style of speed. The IRL struggled to convince fans that their drivers were as good as CART's. Even without the Indy 500, CART continued growing in several ways. In 1998, CART became a publicly traded company on the New York Stock Exchange. Their initial price was $16 per share. The price peaked at $35 in mid-1999. CART was able to raise $100 million through their stock offering, and the team owners made millions. It was even revealed in 2020 that CART made an offer to buy Formula One. But their money would soon fall apart. In 1999, it appeared CART and IRL were on the verge of reunification. NASCAR President Bill France Jr. was leading the peace talks between the two sides. Because France's company International Speedway Corporation owns several tracks, it would benefit him to have one strong IndyCar series selling out dates at his tracks. But in October, the reunification deal fell through, and CART's stock price plummeted from $35 to $19 per share. This cost car owners millions of dollars. And Wall Street investors who were more concerned about CART as a way to make money rather than a quality form of racing played a big role in the quick collapse of the series. Roger Penske later said racers and stockholders had much different interests. For years, the IRL was viewed as a secondary series to CART. It was the new series that was said to be damaging IndyCar with their weak drivers and weak competition. If a driver did well in IRL, they might move up to CART. That was the case with Kenny Brack. In 1998, Brack won the IRL championship and went to CART in 2000, but by the end of the 90s, the new series had critical advantages. In 2000, the split turned in favor of the IRL. That year, Chip Ganassi Racing was the first major CART team to return to the Indy 500. Juan Pablo Montoya won the race easily. The next IRL race after the Indy 500 saw a thrilling fight for the win at Texas. Their level of competition was improving. The IRL attracted sponsors because it was an all-American series. While CART had international races, some sponsors would rather advertise solely in the US instead of sponsoring cars in countries where their product wasn't sold. The quality of racing was high with very close competition and excitement at the so-called cookie-cutter tracks. Texas Motor Speedway president Eddie Gossage called the IRL, quote, the best product on the racetrack today. The attendance was strong at those intermediate-sized ovals because of the practice of personal seat licenses, where tracks would require people to buy tickets for all their events. In order to get NASCAR tickets, you had to buy IRL tickets too. Tony George negotiated a great television deal that placed all IRL races either on ABC or ESPN. And through the TV deal and profits from races at Indianapolis, George was able to financially help IRL teams even in lean years. It was reported that George spent over $200 million to support the IRL when it was losing money. On the other hand, CART was in turmoil once again.
democratic racing organizations have never done well over the long run.
In June 2000, Andrew Craig was forced out as CART president. His time leading the series saw mixed results. Before Craig's arrival, CART was making roughly $20 million in annual revenue and was barely profitable. By 1999, they made $75 million in revenue. But as the split continued to affect open-wheel racing, Craig couldn't correct its problems. Attendance and TV ratings started to decline around 1998. Tracks like Michigan, Nazareth, and Detroit couldn't attract the sellout crowds they once did. While support for CART dropped in the United States, Craig scheduled races in Europe, South America, and Japan. Team owners believed it was more important to increase shrinking support in the U.S. before moving internationally. Some team owners thought Craig was aloof and alienated companies that did business with CART through a lack of communication and planning. As with any war, diplomacy was an important part of a president's role. Several meetings with Tony George to reunite IndyCar racing produced no compromise, which dropped CART's stock price once again. IRL driver Eddie Cheever even called Craig a, quote, secret weapon that helped the IRL by weakening CART. While Craig had his problems, no one better was found to replace him. Between June of 2000 and December 2001, CART had 4 different presidents. Over a few years, the IRL slowly improved its driver situation. After Tony Stewart left the series in 1998, Buddy Lazier filled his role as the star driver, a talented American who didn't bring much money and could win in any series. In 2001, Sam Hornish emerged as the next American superstar. While the IRL wanted to promote American drivers, Tony George also encouraged diversity in racing. The early years of the IRL saw the participation of female drivers like Lynn St. James and Sarah Fisher. Corey Witherell was the first full-blooded Native American to race at Indy. In 2002, George Mack became the second African-American driver to race at Indy. Meanwhile, CART lost their star drivers. Greg Moore died in 1999. At the end of 2000, Juan Pablo Montoya went to Formula One. And in 2001, Alex Zanardi suffered career-ending injuries. Other drivers switched to the IRL. 2001 was a make-or-break year for CART, and the series leadership made several mistakes that hurt them. In April, they were forced to cancel a race at Texas Motor Speedway 2 hours before the green flag. It was the first time coming to Texas, and they never scheduled a test session before the race. CART failed to realize that the cars were too fast for the track, and the G-forces were too much for drivers to handle. They canceled the race and looked foolish for their lack of preparation. In the summer of 2001, CART had a turbocharger controversy between Toyota and Honda. Honda developed a new part for their turbos that gave their engines more power. Toyota demanded CART make a rules change to level the competition. Both manufacturers were upset with the way CART handled the controversy. Both announced they would switch to the IRL in 2003.
The fact that over the last year or so, there's been a lot of changes in rules affecting engine manufacturers made with little regard to our time, our investment, and the amount of money, the people we have involved. It just, we felt that there's no respect for their partners in this business, and we just basically lost trust and confidence in them. So we don't need to work in an environment like that. It's just easier to go.
By the end of 2001, the lack of competent leadership made it obvious that CART would die within a few years. In 2001, Roger Penske returned to the Indy 500, and his teams finished first and second. At the end of the year, Penske left CART for good. A man who helped create the series and became its de facto leader abandoned what he started. It was reported that Marlboro wanted Team Penske to race exclusively in the U.S. instead of CART's international schedule. In 2002, Chip Ganassi ran teams in IRL and CART before switching entirely to the IRL in 2003. Michael Andretti and Bobby Rahal soon joined him. In 2002, the CART IRL fight reignited with strong fury at the Indy 500. Helio Castroneves was leading the race with 2 laps to go and needed to save fuel. A fast-charging Paul Tracy caught Castroneves in turn 3 and passed him for the lead. At the exact same moment, a crash in turn 2 brought out the caution flag.
Yellow, 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 turn 2. Pits are closed, 3's the leader.
Oh, that is the race right there.
Yeah, baby!
He ran just a spurt of fuel, and Paul Tracy's gonna get it.
It was ruled that Castroneves was leader at the moment of caution, and Tracy finished second. The controversy was related to how drivers were told of the caution. All cars had a light in the cockpit that turned yellow at the moment of caution. People who supported Castroneves said he was leading when the moment this light on the dashboard came on. People in support of Tracy pointed to video evidence that showed Tracy was leading when the caution lights were turned on.
Now we move the image over to the right. And again, it's difficult to pick out, but there is a caution light there that has just switched on. You see it go from dark to a yellow shade. So at this point, the caution light is on. If you move the image back to the left, you make the call. It's your judgment as to where those two cars are.
There may have been an actual time difference between when the light on the dashboard came on and the lights on the fence. When was the exact moment of caution, when there were two different ways to relay the message to drivers? Paul Tracy was a kart driver racing for a kart team, whereas Castroneves was an IRL driver in an IRL team. Tracy's team filed an appeal to Tony George, and the process was expected to be highly political. They presented their evidence and waited for George to come to a conclusion. On July 3rd, he announced his decision. Castroneves was officially the winner. It was ruled that it never mattered when the caution light came on, because the race director instantly declared Castroneves as the leader. The official's judgment call was not something that could be appealed. The IRL and kart were still as divided as ever.
Yellow, 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 turn two. Pits are closed, 3's the leader.
The IRL was promoted as an intense series where drivers were always on the edge of danger. Like modern gladiators, their bravery was unmatched throughout all of auto racing.
Look at this, 3 abreast. No way, this isn't gonna work. Yes, it did. At the line. Oh, Hardy's got him. Oh my gosh, what a finish. Unbelievable.
Oh, Castroneves. What a nice move that is.
And standing here, they come at about 220. Man, it'd take your breath.
Do you think we'd ever see you drive one of these cars?
Man, I wouldn't have an electric chair to drive one of these things. No way.
At Indianapolis for the 2002 U.S. Grand Prix, Michael Schumacher said he would never run an American open-wheel race, saying it's too dangerous, and that he's not going to risk his life just for having a good time. That same weekend, Jacques Villeneuve criticized the IRL, saying that the close racing was manufactured and didn't take much skill to do. But that close racing was exactly what it was designed to be from the beginning. Close racing that would get viewers who didn't want to see a drawn-out, uneventful race.
You know what that is? That's the combined margin of finish in the last 3 IRL events here. Are you impressed? Heck yes! We are too. That's why we're here. Oh.
On June 8, 2002, Jeff Ward won an IRL race at Texas by 1 foot. The next day, Cristiano D'Amato won a kart race at Laguna Seca by 20 seconds. The heart-stopping oval racing excitement was a part of the IRL's growing success against kart, but not a sign that everything was great. The IRL went through several tracks where attendance was so poor the venues were quickly dropped from the schedule. Tracks like Las Vegas, Dover, New Hampshire, and Atlanta, all of them NASCAR fixtures, couldn't find an audience in open-wheel racing. At the same time, the majority of kart's road and street course races had sold out crowds. Kart faced a major problem with television broadcasts. While the IRL had races on ABC and ESPN, kart couldn't find anyone who wanted to pay for the TV rights. Amazingly, kart had to pay CBS to broadcast some races and allowed Speed Channel to air other races for free. Their Long Beach Grand Prix was annually one of their biggest events, but in 2003 showed how badly the series had fallen. 95,000 people attended the race, while only 69,000 people watched it on TV. 2003 was the year the power shift was completed. Teams that once bashed the IRL gladly joined the new series. At the end of the year, kart went bankrupt. Shares in the stock were sold for 56 cents, and their remains were reorganized as Champ Car. If people thought the IRL was just a power grab for Tony George, they may have been right by 2003. The field was full of former kart teams, while the small original IRL teams were now gone. While the IRL was created as a series to help American drivers, it was filled with international drivers who quickly mastered the intricacies of ovals: Helio Castroneves, Tony Kanaan, Scott Dixon, and Dan Weldon. But the IRL faced a new problem with rising danger. Originally designed as a safer series than kart, speeds in the IRL grew back to a mid-90s level. Dan Weldon, Helio Castroneves, and even 63-year-old Mario Andretti all suffered airborne crashes by the summer of 2003. Kenny Brack's crash at Texas in October subjected him to a force of 214 Gs, the highest recorded amount a human has ever survived. And finally, Tony Reno was killed in a violent crash in Indianapolis in testing. Once again, speeds were dropped. In 2005, the IRL found the national superstar that it was waiting for.
Danica Patrick. Dominated mostly by men. Danica Patrick is really a star.
Danica Patrick leading. She has the task. A week ago, she sat on the front row and turned heads around the world.
Will she be the first woman to win the Indy 500?
She may be the new heartthrob.
A woman driver making racing history.
Danica Patrick finishes another race.
Win a pole, famous for a day. Win a race, famous for life.
As Patrick was a real contender for wins, the series continued to grow. Ratings for the Indy 500 in 2005 were up 59% over the year before, and their highest since 1996. At Texas 2 weeks later, Dan Weldon made headlines when he declared that the IRL was now a real competitor to NASCAR because of the drivers, the strong teams, and close racing.
You know what? It's a competitive series, best series in the world. So that's what happens when you have that.
But the IRL's momentum was short-lived. In 2006, Chevrolet and Toyota both pulled out of the series, leaving Honda as the only engine manufacturer. All but 2 races in 2006 were won by Roger Penske or Chip Ganassi cars. TV ratings and attendance continued to drop. As the renamed Champ car tried to salvage what was once CART, Sébastien Bourdais dominated. He won 4 straight championships between 2004 and 2007. The only American success came in 2006 when A.J. Allmendinger won 5 races before quickly leaving for NASCAR at the end of the year. By the end of 2007, Champ Car was dead, and the scraps were absorbed by the IRL. Indycar finally had one series.
Well, as the commander of hate in open-wheel racing, I hate the fact that the Indy 500 was screwed up 12 years ago. I hate the fact that Alex Zanardi and Greg Moore didn't get to run the Indy 500. I hate the fact that NASCAR's lapped it several times, but I love the fact that it's back together, and I don't care about the last 12 years because we've done all that muckraking and beating people up, and let's go forward and try and have some good racing because we finally got everybody together. We can identify this, and I think there's a lot of reasons to be positive.
In the summer of 2009, Tony George was removed as CEO of Indycar by the Indianapolis Motor Speedway Board of Directors. They believed he was spending too much money on track upgrades in the middle of a recession. The former CEO of Professional Bull Riders, Randy Bernard, was hired as CEO in early 2010. His time leading Indycar produced mixed results. He oversaw the development of a new chassis for Indycar, its first since 2003. He got Chevrolet and Lotus to re-enter as engine builders. He put a greater emphasis on the Road to Indy driver development program. But the biggest setback for IndyCar under his time had to be the disastrous Las Vegas season finale in 2011. Bernard created a promotion to prove IndyCar had the best drivers in the world by offering a $5 million bonus for any driver from another series that could win the Las Vegas race. After attracting big attention for the series, no driver took the challenge.
We have the fastest, most versatile race car drivers in the world, and no one chose to make that decision to go forward with it. We had 24 inquiries about the opportunity. We had 6 sign up with applications, and we had many others call and inquire about it.
To salvage the promotion, unemployed Indy 500 winner Dan Weldon took the challenge.
I just want to thank Randy for the opportunity, but also thank Randy for what he's done for the IndyCar series to date. I think, he always talks about moving the needle, and I think with the momentum that the IndyCar series has gained this year, I think he's truly achieved just that, and for him, Vegas would certainly be the icing on the cake.
After a star-studded build-up, IndyCar's race at Las Vegas was a disaster. Race officials allowed 34 cars to start the race, the largest IndyCar field since 1997. It quickly became apparent that the cars couldn't get away from each other. On lap 11, James Hinchcliffe and Wade Cunningham made contact and started a massive crash. IndyCar's $5 million man, Dan Weldon, died in the accident. The crash damaged IndyCar's perception of a series of close oval races. While pack racing had been done for years in the IRL, drivers feared ever returning to that style. Randy Bernard received death threats in the aftermath of Weldon's crash. By 2012, Bernard was the victim of another rebellion from team owners. The new chassis for IndyCar was more expensive than expected. TV ratings were dropping. A canceled race in China hurt teams' budgets. Bernard signed an agreement with German tire manufacturer Continental to replace Firestone in 2015. In a 2021 interview, he revealed the large money Continental offered.
First of all, IndyCar, over 15 straight years, and this is public, it had been in the paper, they had lost $30 million a year for 15 straight years. So my job was to come in and try to stop the bleeding, which I did. I made it break even in 3 years. And then I had a major sponsor. I had Continental Tire that was willing to come in and pay $36 million as a sponsor. And Firestone was paying $500,000, and they were giving some endorsements, and they're giving some tires and stuff like that. So it was more than that. But
Firestone tires performed well and never failed. The switch to another company was something team owners were uncomfortable with, no matter how much money was offered. That was the final straw, and Bernard was released. After Bernard's firing, Tony George resurfaced and attempted to personally buy Indycar from Holman & Company, the parent company that owned Indycar. The bid was turned down, and he was named to the board of directors of Holman & Company again in 2013. In 2016, he became chairman of the board again. Finally, in 2019, Indycar began a new chapter in its history. Tony George led the sale of both Indycar and the Indianapolis Motor Speedway to Roger Penske. 25 years after the split, Indycar was a mixture of kart and IRL ideas. The 2021 schedule had even less oval tracks than kart did in the 90s, only 3. Since the split began, there are 49 tracks that have been dropped from the IndyCar schedule, as the series looked for venues that attracted crowds. The cars are a spec chassis, with sealed engine leases to keep costs down. But perhaps the biggest change is now the cars have covered cockpits. Between that and the safer barriers, driver safety is far greater than it's ever been. IndyCar is unified again, but the question remains, will the popularity ever return?